All right, well, good evening, everyone. The time is now 7 o'clock, so we're gonna go ahead and just start getting going on tonight's presentation. Before we get started, as guests are starting to log in right now, I just want to remind everybody that tonight's presentation utilizes captioning auto-generated through Zoom, which means they're about 80% accurate. They often have a hard time with things like names and locations. So I'll leave this screen up for just a few more seconds. If you'd like to change or turn off your closed captionings, you can do so by following the instructions on your screen. You want to hit that live transcript button to manage that. But let's get started. So first and foremost, I want to welcome everybody and thank you so much for coming out to what is the final finale Date with History for the year 2021 Kowalski. I cannot believe it. This is the last one of the year.
Absolutely. Great job so far.
Such a fun year. It's such a great year. We got to learn about so many amazing topics, especially commemorating the 30th anniversary of Desert Storm this year. World War I code talkers, Mise veterans, so many amazing things. Battle of Attu is one of my favorites we did this year. And we're really looking forward to another year in 2022. So let's get started looking at what's coming up here at the First Division Museum. First and foremost, I want to remind everybody that next week we have another virtual presentation, which is part of our 80th commemoration of the anniversary of Pearl Harbor. And that presentation is going to be on Thursday, December 9th. So December 9th at 7 p.m. That presentation is called A Day That Will Live in Infamy, the Attack on Pearl Harbor. And it's going to be brought to us by our friends over at the National Museum of the American Sailor. So you can sign up for that one at fdmuseum.org, and we look forward to seeing you there. But I do want to tell you guys about what is our upcoming Date with History for 2022. Everybody keep in mind that we do not often do a January Date with History, so everybody take a break. January, there won't be a presentation. We'll be getting everything back together in February, and then it'll be Thursday, February 3rd, where we're going to have a presentation called Water is the War Drink, the Path from World War I to Prohibition. And this is a presentation that we're doing in collaboration with the Mob Museum, or the National Museum of Organized Crime and Law Enforcement in Las Vegas, Nevada. We're really excited about working with the Mob Museum. What's special about that month, everybody, is both the Date with History and the headlines from history from our sister museum, the McCormick House, are both going to be hosting speakers from the Mob Museum. We'll be talking about World War I and Prohibition, and the headlines from history that month will be talking about the very famous Chicago incident, which is the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. So come in for those. But the best way to keep in touch with us, everybody, if you're not already signed up for a members email or an honor club email and you want to learn more about what's happening at the First Division Museum, feel free to sign up for our programs email listing. You can register and sign up for that email list on fdmuseum.org. Or if for some reason you're not able to do so, please send me an email. I'm always happy to help. That being said, I'm going to throw it over to my executive director here at the museums at Cantigny Park, Kowalski Salter.
Okay, well, thank you, Laura. It has indeed been a very busy week. I mean, it has been a busy week, but it has been a busy year. And so we are at the end of the year with our Date with Histories, but we also, like you said, have one next week. And I will say that is very timely because last week I was actually at Pearl Harbor. So I'm going to be looking forward to seeing that presentation. And that was my third time actually getting to go to Pearl Harbor. But tonight, and I don't know, do you want me to kind of go over the hand raising instructions and Q&A? So, you know, just like we have been doing all year, Laura is going to do a good job at the end of the program. Matter of fact, an excellent job of getting to as many questions as possible. But the way you submit those questions is to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your computer. Don't use the hand raising feature, but use the Q&A feature, and she will get to as many of those questions as possible. Also, we have been very fortunate this year to not have, I'm going to say, any technical difficulties, because we had one small glitch and no one on the other end knew, because Laura has 2 and/or 3 backup methods to make sure that if we have any technical hiccups, we can square those away in a short order amount of time. And last but not least, before I get to introducing our speaker, I believe tonight, our program tonight does have the teachers feature, where if you are a teacher and you're tuning in, you can get credit for that, Laura. Is that correct for this particular program? Okay, so for some of you who may be teachers out there and you are not registered for that, and you are an Illinois teacher, contact Laura and she will get you into that program. And so you tune into as many of our Date with History programs and our sister program, Headlines from History. It's a feather in the cap for teachers because now you have another tool in your kit bag to use in schools. So without any further ado, because you guys did not come to listen to me, now I'm going to go to my notes and introduce our speaker tonight. So we are very fortunate tonight to have as our speaker, Dr. Robert F. Jefferson, Jr., who is an associate professor of history at the University of New Mexico, where he teaches U.S. history and African-American history. His research interests includes African-American military experience, the Civil Rights Movement, Black Western history, and disability studies. He is the author of at least 3 books that I know of, and maybe 1 or 2 more out there. I know there are 2 on the way, but in 2008, he wrote a book entitled Fighting for Hope, African-American Troops of the 93rd Infantry Division in World War II and Postwar America. That was published in 2008. And in 2019, he had a book published, and it was entitled Black Veterans, Politics and Civil Rights in the 20th-Century America, Closing Ranks. But in between those 2 books, he wrote this book, and this is the book we are here tonight. So yes, Dr. Jefferson, I had your book before we booked you because, you know, I try to keep up on military history and the African-American military experience myself. And that book is entitled Brothers in Valor, Battlefield Stories of the 89 African-Americans awarded the Medal of Honor. And so with that segue, you know, just to get us started, I'm going to kind of put 2 things on the table. You know, so when I read that title, and you know this, it says 89 African Americans have been awarded the Medal of Honor. And I'm just going to throw on the table for our audience that actually 90 Medals of Honor have been awarded to African Americans. And maybe you'll touch on Sweeney and some of that. I don't know if that's in your presentation, but also of the African Americans who were awarded Medals of Honor in World War I and II. There are 2 now in World War I. There are 7 in World War II. And we also know that there are initiatives to look at minorities in World War I. So I know we might talk about that. There's an initiative to look at Hispanic Americans, Asian Pacific Americans, Jewish Americans, African Americans, and Native Americans. And so with that, you want to touch on either one of those before I sign off and turn it completely over to you, Dr. Jefferson?
As of the moment when my book went to press, there were actually 90 African American servicemen who had been awarded the Medal of Honor. One of them, Clement Dees, had his medal rescinded. And also, with that said, Robert Sweeney had been awarded the Medal of Honor twice. So when I thought about it, you know, I said, well, these are the individuals that I'd like to talk about in my book. So I kept it at 89 based on that, just on that criteria alone.
Right. Absolutely. And of course, yeah, I saw Laura shaking her head, and, you know, a lot of people may be surprised, but actually before World War I, you had a number of Americans who were awarded 2 Medals of Honor because of the criteria, and you may talk about that. But without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you because I am looking forward to this presentation, and thanks for being here tonight. And thank you, Laura.
Thank you. Good evening. I would like to thank Karofsky Salter, Laura Sears, and also members of the staff of the first museum at Contini Park for inviting me today to talk about my book, Brothers in Valor, Battlefield Stories of the 89 African Americans awarded the Medal of Honor. Let me first open by talking about how I became interested in writing Brothers in Valor altogether. It grew out of my first book, Fighting for Hope. And during its research and writing, I became intrigued by the way that the US military and the American public drew connections between questions regarding the suitability of Black GIs as fighting soldiers and American citizenship. More often than not, Black combat performance was framed through a prism of courage and bravery. But when I discovered that Black ideas about valor, as well as the very voices of the GIs themselves, and how they define courage for themselves, was often missing from the equation. Not only that, but how their perceptions of these ideas changed during the course of the fighting of wars were hardly ever considered. But since I was at that time writing a social history about the experiences of individuals who served in an all Black division during World War II, that left very little time for me to discuss these issues and these ideas in a larger context. But the questions regarding Black courage never really left me. What I found during the research and writing of Brothers in Valor, there was a historical connection between the nation's ideas about courage and African-American performances in the heat of battle. And these ideas and also Black performances they are as old as the American democracy itself. In the heady days of the American Revolutionary War, mind you, the Continental Congress formalized the meritorious process of ordering that special medals be struck for Generals George Washington, Horatio Gates, and Daniel Morgan for their distinguished action during the conflict. However, the formal medal bestowing process languished until 1847, when Congress passed legislation that expanded the US Army during the Mexican-American War, and attached to the legislation was a rider that authorized the issuing of a certificate of merit to privates who distinguished themselves in peacetime and in war. But by the beginning of the 1860s, this certificate of merit had faded from public view. So in 1861, the means of immortalizing acts of heroism by American military personnel was very much in a state of flux as the nation stood at the water's edge of a civil war. At the beginning of the Civil War, members of Congress held a series of discussions about ways in which official Washington could recognize acts of bravery performed by soldiers, sailors, and Marines during the fighting. The Senate Naval Committee introduced a bill to present a token of appreciation to petty officers, seamen, landsmen, and Marines whom distinguished themselves during the hostilities. Now, this measure was passed by both houses of Congress, and it was approved by President Lincoln on December of 1861. And with that, the Medal of Honor was created for the Navy. Around the same time, a Massachusetts senator by the name of Henry Wilson introduced a resolution creating a similar badge of gallantry for the Army. And this measure was signed into law in July of 1862. And the measure called for the Medal of Honor to be awarded to such non-commissioned officers and privates as shall most distinguish themselves by their gallantry in action and also other soldier-like qualities during the present insurrection. And within months, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton began to bestow these medals to soldiers and sailors who performed acts of bravery during the battles of 1863. But mind you, even as this was happening, there were certain themes that were shaping the African-American military experience throughout this period, namely exclusion. They were first being excluded from the battlefield altogether. Second, necessity. When there was a shortage of American troops, that is white troops, this beckoned the call for large numbers of African Americans to appear in the ranks. Opportunity for those soldiers who flocked to the cause to fight and to fight willingly, and if possible, to die for the cause. And then this was then followed up by denial. And this was the pattern from the Civil War largely through the Second World War, but more about that in a few minutes. So with that in mind, the 89 Black soldiers who appear in Brothers in Valor, the courageous actions they took on the field of battle carried, I think, a dual purpose. It gave them a chance to prove their manhood and to also to stake definite claims to first-class American citizenship. I wanted to present them, and this was very important to me. I wanted to present these individuals as flesh and blood human beings who self-defined thoughts about and acts of bravery during war reflected both the rich, multi-textured, as well as multiple layered dimensions of the African-American experience, but it also reflected the American tortured saga of race in this country. So I wanted to capture both of those through the lives of these individuals that are prominently displayed in the book. So what follows are some of the life history examples of how complicated the American story of race and valor revealed itself, when and where it revealed itself. Could you advance it to slide 3, please? Thank you. In the opening pages of Brothers in Valor, I present the story of William Kearny and the July 1863 Battle of Fort Wagner, South Carolina. Kearny, who you see before you, he grew up in slavery and freedom. His father and his mother worked as slaves in the Hampton Roads region of Norfolk, Virginia for decades prior to the Civil War. During the late 1850s, young William and his parents used the Underground Railroad to successfully escape through Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New York before eventually ending up in New Bedford, Massachusetts. After the first shots were fired at Fort Sumter, Kearny, he flocked to the colors only to be told that his services were not required. But in January of 1863, Kearny gained his chance following the Emancipation Proclamation. And with that, he joined the newly formed 54th Massachusetts Regiment. This is the unit that holds the distinction of being the first Northern Black regiment to fight in the Civil War. In July of 1863, they received orders to lead the attack on Fort Wagner, South Carolina, as the leading element of a Union assault. Fort Wagner held strategic value for Union Army and Navy commanders. As a major enemy stronghold, it rested at the strategic point in Charleston Harbor. Composed of palmetto logs as well as sandbags, the beachhead fortification had the ability of withstanding the fiercest naval bombardment and could house over 1,000 garrison troops. Now, as Kearny and the men of the 54th advanced, intense enemy shelling from the wall fortification stymied their initial approach, making each advance more costly as crucial minutes stretched into hours. In the face of the withering barrage of enemy fire, Kearny himself dropped his weapon and seized the regimental colors when Sergeant John Wall, who's the unit's regimental flag bearer, was wounded. Carrying the flag, Kearny continued to march forward to the fort's entrance as his comrades fell around him. Now, he did this at tremendous cost because he was severely wounded himself in the chest, the right arm, and in each leg. Nevertheless, he never dropped the flag. The point I'm making here is that while the flag may have signified the exact location of the front line on the battlefield, Black troops like William Kearny saw it quite differently. For instance, they saw the rectangular piece of fabric as the symbol of the African-American determination to seize their freedom from the vestiges of bondage that held them for centuries. To give even an inch of ground at this point was to relinquish their present and also their future claims to citizenship. Now, though the assault on Fort Wagner was deemed a failure, news about the outstanding performance of William Kearny made the rounds. It left an indelible mark in the minds of his contemporaries. For his performance on the battlefield, the New Bedford native was promoted to sergeant. And for his heroic performance on that fateful day, he was accorded the nation's highest military medal, the Medal of Honor. But while he was the first African-American soldier to receive the award, he would have to wait nearly four decades to receive public recognition of his deed. And this seems to be the pattern for these soldiers who fought early on. Now, the second life history example of Black valor and the American tortured path of race that I want to bring to your attention took place at Chaffin's Farm, Virginia in 1864. Please advance the slide. Here's a photograph of Christian Fleetwood. You can see him standing there adorned with his uniform, rather dashing. He was born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1840 to Charles and Anna Fleetwood, both free persons. Fleetwood received a public education from the Maryland Colonization Society, and he attended the all-Black Ashman Institute, which later became Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. Before graduating from the Institute, he traveled to Liberia as well as to Sierra Leone before he returned to the United States in 1860, just before the opening stages of the Civil War. In August of 1863, Fleetwood promptly ventured to a nearby camp called Camp Birney, where he entered the ranks of Company G of the U.S. Colored Infantry's 4th Regiment. And as a sergeant major, Fleetwood and his compatriots, they saw their share of action with the Army Corps, participating in some of the fiercest fighting of the Civil War. During the late fall of 1864, the Maryland native distinguished himself in the face of enemy fire during the Battle of Chaffin's Farm, New Market Heights, which is an area located southeast of Richmond. During the crucial moments in the skirmish, Fleetwood earned the Medal of Honor for saving the regimental colors without a scratch. After the color bearer and most of the company had been killed or wounded, he helped to deliver a vital victory for the Union Army. And for their efforts, Fleetwood and 14 other Black soldiers received medals of honor for gallantry in battle. The reason why I mentioned Christian Fleetwood is that he, like so many Black Medal of Honor recipients, found their paths to greater opportunity in the regular Army stymied by post-war racism. For example, in late 1865, Fleetwood applied for a commission as an officer in the regular Army, only to have his superiors not only turn down his request, but also relegate him to the reserves. But Fleetwood, he was not one to take disappointment seriously. For instance, he went home to Washington, D.C., where he continued to serve in the District of Columbia's National Guard, reaching the rank of major by the end of the century. Please advance the slide to slide 5. Thank you. Now here's a slide of the photographic exhibit put together by renowned scholar W.E.B. Du Bois of the living Black Medal of Honor recipients at the turn of the century, the year 1900. Among those that you see there in this slide appeared Civil War veterans like William Carney, also Powhatan Beatty, and Alexander Kelly. But you'll also see Medal of Honor recipients from the Indian Wars, individuals like Benjamin Mays there with the cravat there at the top left, as well as Thomas Shaw, John Denny, with a few also a few of them from the Spanish-American War, like Dennis Bell. Now, with that said, Black valor also took place in the Trans-Mississippi West during the latter half of the 19th century. Please advance the slide once more, please. Thank you. Here, I present to you a letter that was written by someone who has spent a lot of time researching and writing about Emmanuel Stance. Stance was born in 1843. He grew up in East Carroll Parish, Louisiana, and he toiled as a sharecropper before making his way to a recruiting station in Lake Providence, where he joined the Company F of the 9th Cavalry in October of 1866 at the tender age of 19. In May of 1870, Stance's name enters the annals of immortality, and he also reaches public attention when he, along with a small party of men from his company, received orders from the company commander to leave Fort McCavitt and to advance 20 miles north toward a nearby creek in order to scout the activities of Apache Indians who had abducted 2 children 4 days earlier. The detachment of men had barely made it halfway to their destination point when they spotted a group of approximately 20 Indians driving a team of horses. And then at that point, Stance immediately took command of the situation. He quickly organized the men into a line mounted formation and charged the confused enemy forces until they captured 9 of their horses. After pursuing the enemy party into the hills that were located nearby, Stance and his men abandoned the attack and bivouacked for the night. Now, after deciding to return to Fort McCavitt the following morning, the party decamped and also proceeded toward the post, but not before finding themselves facing a group of Indians who were intent on capturing a herd of government horses. At the spur of the moment, Stance again directed a concerted attack against the advancing Indians who appeared on his left flank, despite encountering a desperate attempt made by the enemy to recover their horses. And after a period of fighting, Stance managed to stave off the enemy advance, forcing them to flee in confusion and also sustaining minimal injuries to his men and his horses in the process. And as a result, Stance of his inspired leadership, his commanding officer recommended the non-commissioned officer for the Medal of Honor. In the book, I describe how the actions that were taken by Stance and other actions that Stance took and the actions that were taken by others in the Trans-Mississippi West as frontier honor. Now, what do I mean by that? Is that the physical setting of the post-Civil War Southwest, along with one's character and one's wordless bond assurances, were the necessary elements of a special value system that was invaluable. It was just as invaluable as the stripes of rank one earned while serving in the West itself. But on the other hand, it had its downside because it was it meant and it spelled a fierce defense of one's reputation. Because with these men, they had to do this in order to protect themselves from public ridicule, as well as exploitation and even death. Anything, mind you, that infringed upon one's sense of dignity as a soldier or as an upstanding gentleman was perceived not only as a threat to the existing military code of conduct, but it was also a dire threat to the honor culture that bound the enlisted men as well as the non-commissioned officers together. Please advance the slide again. This slide is the headstone marker of the Medal of Honor recipient, Clinton Greaves. To me, Greaves is really interesting due to the fact that he grew up in Prince George's County, and he also served with the famed 9th Cavalry, one of the most celebrated Buffalo soldier units that operated here, for me, in New Mexico. He entered the Army on the heels of the Civil War and exhibited the characteristics of what I call frontier honor. In January of 1877, Greaves and a small group of troopers with the 9th Cavalry, along with 3 Navajo scouts, they moved out of Fort Bayard after receiving orders to search for Indian raiders who had been active in the area, located about 35 miles eastward from Fort Cummings. Now, the soldiers aimed to suppress future attacks by the hostile Apaches, who posed a dire threat to the New Mexico border. The detachment had barely left the military installation and had approached the area near the Florida mountains when they discovered an encampment of nearly 50 hostile Indians. The troop was outnumbered. But even with that, we see basically Greaves standing at the epicenter of all of this activity. Because as they found themselves being surrounded by the Apache warriors, he used his empty rifle as a club, and he beat off a band of the attacking Apaches. And by taking such bold action, the diminutive non-commissioned officer created an opening that allowed his comrades to escape the nightmare. And during the half-hour course of action, Greaves and the detachment of soldiers, they killed 5 Indians and captured several rifles, as well as 11 horses in the process. And for his efforts, Greaves received the Medal of Honor on June 26, 1879. But the official recognition of Greaves's brave loyalty and devotion to his fellow soldiers at the front that day would have to wait until months later. And here's the rub with all of that. When his superior officer requested that Greaves receive the Certificate of Merit, along with the Medal of Honor for his heroism in southwestern New Mexico, the recommendation became ensnarled in the red tape that was commonplace in the 19th century peacetime army. Only after General William Tecumseh Sherman interceded on his behalf did Greaves receive the War Department's official acknowledgement of his gallant deed. So I say this as a way of pointing out that sometimes frontier honor predisposed these men to these lengthy delays in paperwork, the red tape that was a part of the late 19th century army, and so forth. But at the same time, they found themselves, this frontier honor also predisposed them to violent confrontations with other soldiers who stood in the ranks. Please advance the slide. Here's a photograph of John Denny, an Indian Wars Medal of Honor recipient. In September of 1879, Denny distinguished himself at Los Animas Canyon, New Mexico. But years later, First Sergeant John Denny came to blows with his fellow 9th Cavalrymen after one of the enlisted men cheated him of $3.75 owed to him. After hearing the soldier dispute the claim by calling him a liar, this decorated soldier, he angrily retorted, quote, "You damn bastard, I'll knock your goddamn head off." And at his court-martial that ensued afterwards, Denny defended his actions by pointing to his exemplary military bearing, claiming, quote, I've always endeavored to perform my duties as a soldier. And during any period while serving as a non-commissioned officer, I've taken every precaution practicable to preserve that discipline. So you can see they are living by a particular code of conduct. Anything that brushes up against that code, they felt emboldened to take action, whether it was against basically the enemy that was out there on the battlefield or those who even stood in the ranks. And I think that distinguished them from the other groups. Now, with the outbreak of the war in Spain, 4 Black soldiers in the Spanish-American War used their guns to fight for dignity as well as honor on the field of battle, even though they were also battling the federally sanctioned indignities of a racially segregated army and also constant harassment from white citizens. Please advance the slide again. Here's a photograph of George Wanton. Wanton was born and raised in Paterson, New Jersey, but he entered the 10th Cavalry in 1889 after serving over 4 years with the US Navy. During a battle in Cuba in June of 1898, Wanton and 3 other soldiers staged a successful raid on a prison stockade that housed a company of captured Americans and also freed the captured soldiers. And for their efforts, we see their commanding officer recommending the squad of heroes for the nation's highest honor for gallantry in February of 1899. And after receiving commendations from their superior officers, the Congress conferred the Medal of Honor upon Wanton, as well as 3 other members of the 10th Cavalry 4 months later. Please advance to the next slide. Now, throughout the book, I demonstrate how public recognition of Black valor, more often than not, would not take place until long after the remains of African-American heroes have returned home from battle, and indeed, after several decades into the future. Now, this is a picture of Freddy Stowers. His life story was like this, and very much follows this pattern. On September 28th, Stowers' unit, which was Company C of the 371st Infantry Regiment of the 93rd Infantry Division, received orders to take part in an action that was located along a key strategic point in the Hindenburg line at Bussey Farm. Now, Stowers and the men of his company had moved throughout this area largely unscathed, and they thought that the enemy had long since left the area. In fact, when they encountered enemy combatants near the farm, the South Carolina native and his comrades heard commanding officers issue a call for ceasefire and found themselves climbing out of their dugouts, the opposing soldiers coming out of their dugouts proclaiming their surrender. But to their dismay, Stowers and his men soon learned this was not all that it seemed to be. Because as they moved to reciprocate that gesture, the enemy then jumped back into their positions and proceeded to lay down indiscriminate fire on their company, practically annihilating most of the unit's officers. Now, Stowers was just like many of the individuals that I talked about previously, in which he stepped forward almost immediately and started to provide inspired leadership for the fellow members of his company. He spurred them forward in a desperate fight against the enemy position and also elements of the hill. With total disregard of his own personal danger, he moved his fellow soldiers toward the enemy position until the Germans dropped their weapons and staged a hasty retreat. And as a result, they seized this precious stronghold, Hill 188. They captured many German prisoners, and they also secured precious machine guns, as well as railroad cars and enormous quantities of lumber and supplies. In addition, if that wasn't enough, they also shot down 3 German airplanes during their attack. However, unfortunately, Stowers would not live long enough to see the fruits of his courageous act, because when the assault ended, he, along with over 40% of his 200-man company, were brought down during the battle. And during this fighting, Stowers himself was gravely wounded by machine gun fire. But his actions earned him many French honors during this period. And he was also recommended for the Congressional Medal of Honor. Could you advance to the next slide? He was buried there, and this is his grave site there. He was buried there in France. He was buried in the Mousargon American Cemetery there. France would be his final destination, for he would die during this case. But for his distinguished service, he received the Croix de Guerre, which is France's highest military decoration for fortitude on the field of battle. In most instances, if you think about this, his courageous exploits would have generated the same outpouring of praise from his observers in the United States, but this wasn't the case. It would take the twists and turns of nearly 80 years before his deeds would be recognized by the country of his birth. Please advance to the next slide. The same could be said of Henry Johnson, and this is a picture of Henry Johnson. In May of 1918, the Argonne Forest prompted the courageous actions of Johnson, who at that time was a private with the 369th Infantry. Johnson and a fellow soldier were standing guard at a small outpost near the German lines when Johnson heard what he thought was the shearing of barbed wire in the vicinity. Almost immediately, he and his compatriots found themselves being besieged by a raiding party of almost 20 Germans, who proceeded to fire on as well as to wound the soldiers. Undaunted, however, Johnson, with grim determination and known as Black Death by his fellow servicemen for his intense fighting in France, returned immediate fire. Seeing his comrade in danger, he emptied his magazine of his rifle before grabbing his bolo knife. And armed only with the bolo, he fiercely engaged the Germans in a deadly hand-to-hand combat. And with that, the Battle of Henry Johnson ensued. After splitting the head of one of the enemy combatants, he disemboweled the German leader of the raid, who was dragging one of his comrades away, freeing the severely wounded soldier who was in his grasp. The heroic actions that were taken by the former railway porter had so stunned the German party that they promptly gave up their dead and wounded before hastily fleeing the outpost altogether. But Johnson pressed the attack a bit further, using his empty rifle as a club and throwing hand grenades at the fleeing enemy before being forced to yield to the severity of his own wounds. Shortly afterwards, he was transferred to a French hospital where he and his comrades convalesced, but not before the word of his bravery began to attract the attention of the French as well as the American commanders throughout Europe. At that time, Johnson received France's highest military medal, the Croix de Guerre, from the French Army commander, earning the distinction of being among the first American soldiers to receive such an honor in the war. But Henry Johnson, the thing about Henry Johnson was this: he was discharged from the Army, but his wounds left him permanently crippled, and they prevented him from being able to secure employment in his old positions in the States. Penniless and denied a veteran's pension, Johnson died a destitute alcoholic in July of 1929 at the age of 32, and he was buried with full military honors in Arlington National Cemetery. Now, although he received the Purple Heart posthumously, the Medal of Honor still eluded him. And as his wartime deeds proceeded into the realms of mythology, the Albany chapter of the 369th Regiment veterans, they traveled to the state capitol for nearly a century, urging lawmakers to push for legislation honoring the New York native. In addition, Assemblyman Michael McNulty and also Senator Alphonse D'Amato introduced bills in their respective chambers of the House calling for the Medal of Honor for Johnson, but to no avail. But in June of 2015, President Barack Obama, at the behest of New York Senator Chuck Schumer and a host of prominent scholars, gathered in the East Room of the White House, where the nation's highest honor for valor was finally bestowed upon them. Now, this ceremony was pregnant with meaning. State members, as well as honored guests, looked on as the Command Sergeant Major Lewis Wilson of the New York National Guard accepted the medal on behalf of the long since fallen soldier. And on that fateful day, President Obama made the following remarks that the country should have made some decades earlier. He stated, "It takes our nation too long sometimes to say so." He added, "We have work to do as a nation to make sure that all of our heroes' stories are told." And that's, for me, that's like one of the telling moments in this telling of the stories of these men, is that only belatedly are they recognized publicly. And then when they're recognized, it's always placed in the frame of race, which tells you that both of them are inextricably linked. And they're also, I think, in close tandem to each other as we start to think about the experiment of American democracy. Now, World War II and the Korean War, I think, mark what I believe is the major turning point in this relationship between African Americans in uniform and also the nation's ideas about courage. Could you advance to slide 13? The slide that I have in front of you is of John Fox. Advance it again. The next one is and also the next slide 15. This is Vernon Baker here. Advance it once more. And this is Baker in 1997 receiving the Medal of Honor. Now, for John Fox, Vernon Baker, and the other 5 comrades who distinguished themselves in action during the Second World War, the task of seizing what Baker describes in his memoir as the hero's mantle couldn't have been more daunting. Because once they had arrived in Europe and Asia in the early 1940s, they quickly discovered that the fight for first-class citizenship had taken a new meaning once they stepped ashore. Why is this? Because those who stood in the ranks of the segregated army at that time were being labeled by official Washington and senior army commanders as unreliable soldiers, or they were described as soldiers who ran away in the heat of battle, even before they began to move into active areas in order to engage the enemy and to confront the horrors of modern warfare. And in some ways, Their mission was similar to those that was taken up by previous medal recipients of Valor. Like their predecessors, the war in Europe and Asia offered Black servicemen like Vernon Baker and others the rare opportunity to carry guns, ammunition, and a chance to strike back at their oppressors. Like their ancestors who saw the Confederate Army, the American Indian nations, the Spanish Empire, and the Central Armies of the previous wars as as the embodiment of the systems of racism that threatened their collective existence, they came to regard Hitler, Mussolini, and Hirohito as representatives of the oppressors, of their oppressors at home. But they also realized that they were being asked to pay a price that they would have to bear for all of those who lived under the threat of racism and class antagonism at home. And in many cases, the acts of bravery would not be recognized until nearly 50 years later. And for the Korean War Medal of Honor recipients, William Thompson, as well as Cornelius Charlton, the Korean War had a dubious meaning of being America's first military skirmish in the emerging Cold War between the Soviet Union and its satellites and the United States and its allies, where the American forces faced the limitations of their post-World War II power. So we see this happening during this war, but at the same time, they're finding themselves fighting a war within the wars. They also were being subjected to these vicious rumors that were being spread throughout official Washington, as well as senior Army commanders, about being frightened under fire. And much of this, mind you, a lot of this was centered upon the actions that were and the activities of the 24th Infantry Regiment. And with these negative reports that circulated about this regiment, we see history textbooks as well as social science literature simply use that negative depictions of these units to highlight they use these negative depictions in order to justify the denial of first-class citizenship to African Americans in general. Okay, advance it again. Advance it once more. Okay, this is a photograph of Cornelius Charlton's family with Secretary of the Army Frank Pace. This photograph was taken in March of 1952. Charlton distinguished himself in battle when he, along with a platoon of the 24th Infantry's 3rd Battalion, attempted to capture a hill north of a village of Chipori. Now, during the 8th Army's Operation Pile Driver, they fell headlong into a well-fortified Chinese entrenchment, which was manned by enemy soldiers who were armed with numerous heavy automatic weapons. And as a result, they took tremendous casualties, losing their platoon leader in the process. It was during these taxing circumstances that Sergeant Cornelius Charlton stepped forward. He was very talented, and he advanced well throughout the ranks when he was in service, to the point where he became a non-commissioned officer. Now, this talented non-commissioned officer had just reported to the platoon just weeks before having been assigned to an engineering service unit in Korea. But his leadership skills were considerable, and they were soon recognized by his superiors. Not long after being placed with the unit, his second lieutenant had recommended him for a battlefield commission. After learning that the platoon leader had lay mortally wounded, Charlton took command of the beleaguered platoon and led them up the hill. After attempting to advance 3 times and suffering heavy casualties in the process, the West Virginia native single-handedly destroyed 2 Chinese positions and killed 6 enemy soldiers. All the while, he exposed himself to heavy fire, sustaining wounds to his chest while advancing the attack. The war heroes actions inspired eyewitnesses who were present during that time in a profound way. For instance, as one enlisted man in the company put it, Charlton was wounded in the chest, but he refused to be evacuated. He got the rest of the men together and we started for the top. The enemy had good emplacements. We couldn't get to him. Grenades kept coming at us and we were chased back down again and again. We tried over and over again, but to no luck. Sergeant Charlton said he was going to make it this time and he yelled, "Let's go." And I saw the sergeant go over the top and charge the bunker on the other side. He got the gun, but was killed by a grenade. Charlton's selfless act came at a tremendous cost because he later died from his wounds. But he saved most of the men in his platoon. On March 12, 1952, the Bronx, New York native was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. And what you see in that picture is a photograph of his father and his mother, along with his sister and brothers to the left. And you can see how they're standing so resolute and proud and really proud of their relatives' selfless act that he performed. But even in his death, a battle ensued over Charlton's legacy. Even though his remains were laid to rest in his hometown of Beckley, West Virginia, his parents demanded that he be reinterred with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. The response they received from official Washington left a lot to be desired, however. Army officials stated that they did not offer to rebury the fallen GI at Arlington or another location because of an administrative oversight. But his family members told a different story. His brother later recalled bitterly, "They say it was an administrative error, but I say it was discrimination." The fight between Charlton's family members and the Army over his burial lingered for nearly 40 years. In 2008, a group of white veterans from Beckley's American Legion Post petitioned members of Congress urging them to address the apparent oversight. And in May of 2008, Korean War veterans and Charlton's surviving family members assembled for the reburial of Charlton's remains at the National Cemetery. Among those in attendance included an assistant secretary of state, a local congressman, 2 Army generals, and a full honor guard from Fort Knox, Kentucky. Now, while some in the audience gathered to commemorate the memory of a soldier who fought and died in a war that took place over 40 years ago, the fighting and its meaning may have been too distant to cause any misgivings about the past. But for others, Charlton's life and death led to a different conclusion. For example, Sergeant Major Lindsey Bowers, the president of the 24th Infantry Regiment Association at the time, commented, "This guy should have had the kind of heroes ceremony. If it had been a white officer who had won the Medal of Honor, somebody would have come forward immediately." Now, the last 3 slides of Dwight Johnson and Melvin Morris brings us to a fitting close to my talk today, for they signify how valor carried a quality that continues to require a constant evaluation of American democracy and how American society continues to struggle with the meaning of valor when it comes to race. Whereas earlier in the book, I point out that Black valor meant preserving a unit's flag, right, during the Civil War. It also came to mean fulfilling notions of frontier honor, and it spelled later on in the 20th century, upholding a unit's reputation during World Wars I and II, as well as the Korean War. For Dwight Johnson and Melvin Morris, bravery in the Vietnam era meant saving the physical well-being of one's comrades from serious injury and death. So in their eyes, as well as those of the 19 other African-American Medal of Honor recipients from that period, Black and white blood both flowed from the same river of freedom, and all lives mattered in an increasingly racially segregated, gender stratified armed forces. Advance the slide, please. As case in point, take this slide. This is a photograph of Lyndon Johnson awarding the Medal of Honor to the second individual to the left there, Dwight Johnson. For Johnson, the Vietnam War and its aftermath carried deadly consequences. In 1968, the Detroit, Michigan native, he had returned home only to struggle with his own inner demons. He would basically gain his distinction in battle in 1968 during the Tet Offensive in itself. On January 15th, he and his platoon members, they were headed towards the Central Highlands near the Cambodian border and the Ho Chi Minh Trail when they were ambushed by a battalion-sized North Vietnamese force. As the minutes stretched into hours, the situation became very dire for Johnson and his men. During initial contact, the enemy had destroyed several tanks in the process. However, Johnson, he promptly jumped out of his track and armed with a 45 caliber pistol, proceeded to kill several North Vietnamese soldiers before expending all of his ammunition. The 21-year-old GI then gathered himself and ran through a heavy crossfire to one of the burning tanks, pulling men out of the wreckage. And returning to his track, he located a submachine gun and proceeded to hunt down the enemy on foot. At one point, he stood face to face with the communist soldier, during which he shot and killed him at close range. Afterwards, he returned to his track and continued to continue firing on the enemy until the rest of his platoon arrived on the scene. Showing such concern for his fellow soldiers, with little regard for his own safety, and acting so decisively in the face of the enemy, he was awarded the nation's highest award for valor in November of 1968. But Johnson and his fighting was just beginning, because he and his comrades, they quickly noticed that his actions during the campaign had taken its toll on the celebrated soldier. After returning home and receiving the Medal of Honor, the troubled hero was a widely sought commodity, with the likes of General William Westmoreland, the Army Chief of Staff and Commander of U.S. forces in Vietnam, entertainer Bob Hope, and also Detroit's chapter of the American Legion. They were all clamoring for his attention. However, it was not long before Johnson's battlefield struggles resurfaced in his post-war life. First of all, he had gone into financial debt after writing bad checks and missing several public appearances. Second, he suffered a variety of health-related ailments. After undergoing a battery of medical evaluations, military physicians determined that Johnson suffered from psychiatric distress that stemmed from his military service in Vietnam. On a cool night in April of 1971, his wartime struggles were brought to an ignominious end. During an attempt to rob a grocery store less than a mile from his home, a store manager shot and killed the war hero. And on May 6th, the Vietnam veteran was buried with military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. But as his body was being interred into the hallowed grounds of the National grave site, one of his childhood friends ironically remarked, quote, "They get quiet. It's like they don't have too much to say about what it was like over there. Maybe it was because they killed people and they don't really know why they killed them." But it was this type of irony surrounding these veterans during this period, I think, that very much shaped the African-American Vietnam experience, but it really had a profound impact on soldiers like Dwight Johnson. Now advance the slide once more, please. This is a picture of Melvin Morris at the time he entered military service in 1959. For Vietnam War heroes like Melvin Morris, definitions of valor were paid forward in a certain respect. Now you can go to the final slide. And this is a picture that was taken in May of 2014, in which President Obama placed the nation's highest basically award for gallantry in battle on Mr. Morris. Morris himself, just a few words about him, and then I'd like to close this. In May of 2014, President Obama placed a call to a former GI for an oversight that was committed by the US government decades earlier. On the other end of the line stood Melvin Morris, who was a former Vietnam War veteran, who was from Florida at that moment. Morris was born in 1942, and he was originally from Oklahoma and had been in the State National Guard before joining the Army in 1959. He was a former Green Beret. Morris had served several tours in South Vietnam before he was wounded 3 times while recovering the body of a fallen comrade in the face of withering machine gun fire during a firefight in 1969. For his gallantry, Morris received the Distinguished Service Cross in 1970, but receiving such award hardly fazed the battle-hardened soldier. He later recalled, I never really did worry about decorations. Little did he realize it, but he would become the beneficiaries of one of the beneficiaries of the government's new policy for assessing courage under fire. In 2002, the Defense Department, at the behest of members of Congress, launched an investigation into the historic prejudice against Hispanics and Jews who served in the nation's military. They particularly focused on all of the recipients who had previously been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for acts of valor during World War II, but broadened their scope to include the Korean and Vietnam Wars. Among those who appeared on the list was a former staff sergeant who lived in Florida. And of President Obama's call, Morris remembered, quote, I fell to my knees. I was so shocked. President Obama said he was sorry that this didn't happen before. He said this should have happened 44 years ago. Now, not long afterwards, Morris would find himself appearing at the White House where a mass ceremony to honor 24 veterans, mostly of Hispanic as Jewish or Jewish heritage, who had previously earned the nation's second highest award of valor, but had not been recognized for the Medal of Honor until that moment. And as the nation's first African-American president placed the prestigious award medal around Morris's neck, what I find in that photograph is that basically past, present, as well as the future generations of soldiers who were present for that gathering were bearing witness to a new standard of honor that was coming into being. One that was deeply enveloped in the timeless banner of freedom, but was now being boldly embossed with the emblem of equality. And with that, the Brotherhood of Valor that was formed by stalwarts like Carney, as well as Fleetwood, Stance, Vernon Baker, and the like, they found a new convert standing in their ranks. And the fuller implications of how these new bonds of bravery will be translated into action by successive generations of African Americans have yet to reveal itself, however. In fact, a new chapter in the official recognition of Black valor is now being currently written with the push to have the heroic struggles of African American service personnel like Waverly Woodson, Doris Miller, and others placed in the annals of the American military past. Thank you.
I want to thank you so much. I know that we are in a virtual audience, so you cannot hear people's appreciation virtually. So on behalf of everybody watching, I want to give you a round of applause and thank you for taking this time to uplift these stories to us this evening. You had mentioned Corporal Woodson, so I'm actually going to ask Kowalski if he could pop back on for us real quick. Because if you'd love to learn more about an African-American soldier whose story is being evaluated right now, and I know I personally am just waiting for him to be recognized with the Congressional Medal of Honor. But Kowalski, can you briefly tell us a little bit about Corporal Waverly Woodson and where our guests can learn more about him at the 1st Division Museum?
That is a good segue, Laura. Well, absolutely. So Waverly Woodson was one of the African-American soldiers in World War II who actually came ashore on D-Day on some of the boats, LSTs, with the 1st Infantry Division and the 29th Infantry Division. And so he is actually interpreted in the 1st Infantry Division Museum in our D-Day gallery. And so we are proud to also, include that more inclusive story. And Laura is right, and you are exactly right, that he is one of those great Americans who is being reconsidered for the Medal of Honor.
His wife is still with us, and I know that she's also looking forward to that as well. But again, I want to thank you so much. And so I want to get cracking on these questions that we have coming in. We have a lot coming in. Again, I will do my best to get to as many of these questions as possible. But first and foremost, I want to start off with a question that came in from one of our teachers. They want to know a little bit about, since you started our story this evening with Sergeant Carney, they were curious on your opinion of the Hollywood movie Glory. They're using it to teach in their AP US history class to introduce the contribution of Black soldiers in the Civil War. They also use Private Johnson in World War I, but what are your feelings, if you have any to share with us, about the film Glory and that depiction?
I think the film Glory is, I think is a great film to use. It's a starting point, but it can't be the end point. I think you would be well suited to have your students read some of the primary documents from that period, the letters that were left by the soldiers and so forth. And that would give them a window into what those soldiers, what they thought, the feelings that they had, also the relationships that they shared with others. I think it makes the picture fuller for your students there. And it'll have them, I think it'll raise interesting questions among them about, okay, we know what happened to these individuals who fought in the war. We get a under the hood view of who they are, and we get inside their heads. Now, what are the implications of what they did, what they thought, and what they expressed, and how they translate it into action? I think that's what the film opens the door to.
I think that's a really good point too. The next question I have coming in is, we talked a lot about valor in regards to race and the definition of valor and how that's evolved over time. Do you have any input on valor in regards to gender? We only have one Medal of Honor recipient who is a woman, Dr. Mary Edwards Walker. But I didn't know if you have any thoughts on that. I would love to hear it.
Well, I do. In a lot of ways, this book was, for me, it was a preliminary foray into thinking about valor in general, and also Black valor and specifically. But I wanted to know, my thing is, I wanted to know, okay, how many women served in frontline duty during these wars, because they did serve, and they escape our view because of the fact that we're only looking at the documents and we're only looking at this through a particular lens. I think if we broaden the lens, we'll find more of them. We'll find more Mary Walkers than we ever imagined. I think that's a really important part of the story, and we need to uncover as many of these stories as we possibly can, because otherwise American democracy in itself is very incomplete.
Absolutely. One guest wants to know if you've ever been to the Medal of Honor Museum.
No, I have not. And I'll tell you why. First of all, when I was working on this book, I wanted to go there, but then I got sidetracked by something else. And that was, I learned that I received a Fulbright to Europe, and I was gone. And I said, you know what, when I come back, I want to go to the museum.
Mhm.
Well, the Fulbright got cut short by the pandemic. So all of those plans got short-circuited. And so, I mean, it's been like a frustrated effort to try to get back out. So
Yeah.
that is one of the first places I plan to go.
Absolutely. And I had one guest who commented on our previous question there in regards to gender, and had even mentioned the fact that in prior combat, women would hide their gender and not
They
really
sure
reveal
would.
that. So again,
sure
just
would.
digging into that would be really amazing, and I agree. One of our guests would like to know a little bit more about going into equality and awarding military honors. We looked at that in prior conflicts to Vietnam, but how far have we come in that? Have there been any Medal of Honors that have been awarded to soldiers of color after Vietnam?
Oh yeah, what I've recently learned, the most recent African-American service member to receive this Medal of Honor was from the Vietnam War era. He was a major sergeant. He was a Marine Sergeant Major, John Canley, and he received a Medal of Honor for his actions in Vietnam in 1968. Once again, and he received his Medal of Honor in 2018 from President Donald Trump. So we're only, I think, barely scratching the surface as to how many Medal of Honor recipients that are out there whose selfless deeds have gone unrecognized. I think they have been recorded. We just have to look below the surface, and we have to look at the documents, the evidence, in a broader fashion.
No, that's a great question. To follow up with that, are we aware of any African-American or Black soldiers who were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor from conflicts after Vietnam, in the Gulf War, and
I think there has been one. That's a good question, because I've been trying to do research on that as a follow-up to this book. I think there has been one, but I'm not sure. But that goes to show you that even though we're talking about this and we're talking about the numbers, I think the numbers are far short of where they will be once we start to uncover the record and start to look in different places. For instance, I'll give you a classic example of this. We've only looked, the tendency is to look at the National Personnel Record Center in St. Louis, right? But you know, they had that major fire there.
Fire.
Right. So I think one of the ways to look at this is to look at the archives that in countries abroad, like in France and as well as in the UK, to see who has been recognized there. And then that's going to open a window for thinking about a larger number that is out there.
Yeah, yeah.
Particularly for World War I. I think due to the fact that so many soldiers have gone overlooked, that we definitely have to look at archives abroad to see exactly what the other commanders were writing about African American soldiers during that era. I think it'll give us a bigger picture, a bigger frame through which we'll be able to see all of this.
Yeah. All right, so I do want to honor our time, so I'm going to try and start wrapping up. I see so many great questions coming in, but I'm going to try and wrap it up here. And could you let us know a little bit more about the standard process by which a Medal of Honor is awarded? And then to follow up with that, kind of a secondary question to that is, we talked a little about Medal of Honor recipients that have had their designation downgraded to a lesser award, and how does that happen?
Okay. That's one, and I'm going to get to that.
Good question.
First question is, your superior officer, in this case, let's say it was Vernon Baker, your superior officer would have to place your name as being somebody to be recognized for the Distinguished Service Cross.
Mhm.
And when that happens, and when you're recognized on that light, and it goes up the chain of command, then you automatically should be considered for the Medal of Honor. But in the case of Black soldiers, this didn't happen. Sometimes the paperwork got lost. Other times you had commanders say, well, I can't really put you in for that, because if I do, that's going to cause not only trouble for the military in itself, but it's also going to cause problems for American society. In fact, many of these soldiers were told that very thing. So that would happen quite a bit. Now, the second part of your question is, wait, I think I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. Let me know. Okay, I'm going to re-ask it. Are you ready?
All right, yeah, go ahead.
We talked a little bit about how a Medal of Honor recipient had a designation downgraded to a lesser award. How does that happen?
Well, and this happened during the post-Civil War Army. This happened quite a bit. We see it happening also in the 20th century. This in the 20th century American military is occurring, and it's where you have basically a panel, a commission that is looking at this and given a set of criteria or benchmarks of expectations that they have about what valor means on the battlefield. They make a designation as to where the person's actions will fall. And in many cases, they might be put up for the Medal of Honor. Given that criteria they have, they might be downgraded. And this happened too. This happened quite a bit.
And another great, if you'd like, of course, I always tell our guests, this is not an ending conversation. This is a starting conversation. So feel free to go out and please learn more after our conversation tonight. But another person to search more into that who had their Medal of Honor downgraded is Mary Edwards Walker.
That's right.
For various reasons. One being, as a woman, she was not in the Army. So that's another person who had it taken away and then given back to her posthumously. So again, lots of really interesting stories there. But I do have one final thought for us that came in from one of our teachers and good friends. So I just wanted to mention there is one soldier that he'd like for us to point out this evening. That is Army Sergeant First Class. And I apologize if I am saying the name incorrectly. Alwyn Cash, he is served during Operation Iraqi Freedom, who is Medal of Honor recommendation, is reportedly awaiting the White House scheduling of an award ceremony. It is a posthumously awarded Medal of Honor, but please everybody keep looking for that in the news, and we will be tuning in for that Medal of Honor ceremony hopefully soon.
Can I say one more thing about you mentioned a downgrading of these Medal of Honor, the Medal of Honor possible recipients. The other thing to keep in mind is that the racial dictates of the 20th century, particularly in the first half of the 20th century, also led to the downgrade of recognition of medals all the way down the line, from the Medal of Honor going through the Distinguished Service Cross to the Silver Star and on down. So I think as a part of the government, of this government reassessment of these individuals, you have to look at those who have received lesser medals, and their feats possibly may have risen to that standard of the Medal of Honor in itself, for the gallantry in battle, that they should be seen in that light. And that's going to be to me, that's a part of this opening that needs to happen.
Yeah.
But that is as old as American democracy in itself, and the American what I consider to be the American experiment with not only with democracy, but also its tortured path and with race, because race happens to be like one of it's at the crux of a lot of things that have happened historically in this country. The Medal of Honor is no different.
All right, Dr. Jefferson, I want to thank you so much for wrapping up our 2021 Day with History series with such an amazing evening. Kowalski, we're going to be signing off. Are you ready?
Yes, I
Everybody,
am. I'm ready. And this was a great way to end the year, but we do have one more program. And Dr. Jefferson, thank you. We really enjoyed it.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. And happy holidays to you.
happy
Okay.
holidays to
Much love.
everybody. And I want to thank all of our veterans who are attending this evening. Thank you for your service. Welcome home. We're so glad you can join us. We will see everybody in 2022. Get ready. Have a happy holidays, everybody.
Okay.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Bye. Bye.
Night.